April 1st, 1997. This is the date that the Pokemon anime first debuted and introduced the world to our boy Ash Ketchum. The Pokemon anime has been running for 25 years now, and to many, it is their favorite anime. Over the years, we've seen our main protagonist, Ash Ketchum, travel the Pokemon world and visit many various regions in his quest to become a Pokemon master. He's met many friends, including the likes of Brock, Misty, Dawn, Clement, and more recently Go. He's also had many rivals from Gary to Paul to Alon and Gladion. Throughout his many adventures, he has sought to keep getting stronger, capture new Pokemon, and keep growing as a Pokemon trainer. He's gone from the top 16 back at the Indigo League all the way to winning the Alola League and becoming the region's first champion. He has grown tremendously over the years. Each series has worked to improve upon the last and make each adventure better than the last. As it would seem, the show has a natural progression with improving itself. Or does it? Naturally, the more a team of writers, or anyone for that matter, works on a project, they tend to improve their skills and make their content increasingly better. But that doesn't seem to be the case for the Pokemon anime. At least, not entirely. So to celebrate the Pokemon anime's 25th anniversary, I'm creating a brand new series to review the evolution of the Pokemon anime's writing. To many fans, Pokemon was at its peak during Diamond and Pearl and X and Y, with Sun and Moon close behind. Many fans say that the advanced generation laid the blueprints for the success of Diamond and Pearl. Sun and Moon and Pokemon Journey seem to be the most divisive generations in Pokemon history, with X and Y seeming to have created the most toxic Pokemon fans. But where do all these opinions and perspectives come from, and are they really an accurate representation of the Pokemon anime and its fanbase? Today we'll start our in-depth analysis of the writing of the Pokemon anime across each generation and how it's developed or regressed across each series. We'll take a look at the writing staff and its head writers over the years, as well as how the narrative and overarching story has been handled in each series and what it adds to or takes away from the anime as a whole. There will also be certain key factors from each series that we will identify as well to fully understand some of the writing choices made during each series and how they affect the story. For instance, a negative aspect the Pokemon Journeys will explore later on is its reliance on nostalgia and returning characters, or a controversial decision with Black and White being a soft reboot of the entire anime. But now that I think you guys have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in today's video, let's not waste any more time and begin our discussion with Part 1, the original series. Let's get started. The Pokemon anime began with its first season being the iconic Indigo League saga. In this season, Ash begins his journey as a Pokemon trainer after turning 10 years old and heading to Professor Oak's lab to receive Pikachu as his starter Pokemon. Now this season is pretty simple as it follows the plot of the Red and Blue games, with Ash challenging all the Kanto gyms, earning their badges, and taking on the Indigo League. But since the anime is an adaptation of the games, the writers get to have creative liberties with it and show off the Pokemon world in a way the games cannot. Now before we continue any further in discussing the good and the bad of the Indigo League saga, it's important to note that the Pokemon games and anime were only supposed to last a duration of one generation. Only the original games of Red, Blue, Green, and Yellow were supposed to exist along with only the very first season of the anime. The creator, developers, and writers and head writer did not foresee Pokemon becoming as popular as it did, so they did not anticipate continuing onward into Generation 2. It's also important to note that since these are the very first games, as well as the very first season of the anime, they don't have an established formula, process, or method for handling the games or anime. It's their first go-around, so plenty of mistakes are bound to happen. And they did. Now when it comes to the Pokemon anime and its writing and how it's handled, the games have always served as a blueprint for the story and narrative, and this is going to be a major point to keep in mind throughout this whole video and the rest of the series that we'll come back to quite a bit. So since the game served as a blueprint for the anime up until Generation 7, which is also important to keep in mind, it would naturally be easy for the writers to set up their story for the current season in accordance with the events of the games. Starting in Pallet Town, getting a starter, heading to Viridian City, then Pewter City, and so on and so forth would be a natural progression. Now, the spacing of these events is totally left up to the writers, but when you're watching the anime, you can predict what events should be happening next if you've played the games. But again, since it's the anime, they still get to have creative liberties with it to help differentiate them from the games and make it more its own entity. The anime should never really be a one-to-one of the games. Now, the main problem with the Indigo anime is without a doubt the way they went about showing off Ash Ketchum as a trainer. Don't get me wrong, he had plenty of great moments as a trainer in battle, most noteworthy being his league battles prior to Richie and his battle against Lieutenant Surge. But Ash as a trainer just wasn't handled the best he could have been. I mean, at least half of his Kanto gym badges were won illegitimately, majority of the time he was just really battling Team Rocket, and there were so many moments where battles would get interrupted and prevent Ash from showing off his true skill at the time and from improving. On the flip side, the Indigo anime does an amazing job of showcasing off the Pokemon world for what it is, the world of Pokemon. They constantly introduced new characters that had new Pokemon. New Pokemon tended to be encountered at least every 1 to 3 episodes, so the writers did a great job of making each episode in the first season feel refreshing since a new Pokemon was introduced quite frequently. The Indigo season is also home to some of the best fillers and most entertaining episodes in the entire series. They gave Ash really savage jokes, at least in the dub. The locations were exciting, such as Island of the Giant Pokemon, and the writers weren't afraid to go outside of the box and give the characters a crazy adventure. Like, when was the last time we saw Ash become a ghost? I'm pretty sure it was back in Kanto in the Indigo saga. Now, going back to the point I made earlier about the first generation of Pokemon only being meant to be just one generation is crucial because it very much affects the amount of development that each character can get in the anime. If Pokemon didn't extend past Generation 1, the anime probably would have had the most basic and bland characters in existence out of any anime. Throughout the Indigo saga, Ash is obviously the character with the most development, and behind him is probably Brock. Characters like Misty and Gary don't receive too much development due to the focus on Ash's gym challenge, Team Rocket shenanigans, or just not having that much screen time like in the case of Gary. Hell, I'm pretty sure Team Rocket gets more development than Ash and Gary, and they're not even the main characters. However, the Indigo saga excelled at making each character feel unique. When the writers took their time focusing an entire episode on one character, such as Brock, Meowth, or even just the main Pokemon themselves like Pikachu and company, you could definitely find it easier to connect with each character and understand them. The episode that explains Meowth's backstory and why he can speak like humans is to this day one of the most emotional episodes in the entire Pokemon anime, and really humanizes Meowth and makes you feel sorry for him. It's episodes written like that give the original season its beauty. The Indigo season could have been way better than it came to be, but of course that was the staff's first crack at writing the anime. The pacing is pretty good for this season and it kept things fresh and funny, but it lacks substance and depth. The rivalry between Gary and Ash is pretty shallow, his gym battles are underwhelming, and a lot of important moments are affected and ultimately ruined by Team Rocket. The most infamous instance being that it's basically Team Rocket's fault that Ash loses to Richie since they wore down Ash's team prior to the battle. So many moments in the first season could have been so much better in execution if Team Rocket wasn't involved. Nonetheless, the Indigo season would lay the groundwork for the rest of the series and how the writers would proceed with the show. However, the next season of the anime would fall into a weird situation that actually allows it to be one of the most unique seasons in the entire anime. After Ash's journey through Kanto concludes, he's tasked by Professor Oak with retrieving the GS ball from Professor Ivy on Valencia Island. After retrieving the GS ball and with Brock deciding to stay back and help out Professor Ivy, Ash hears about the Orange Crew and decides to enter into the Orange League. This will be his next big challenge as a Pokemon trainer. Many people are quick to write this second season of the anime off as filler, and I totally get that. It technically is filler since the only reason it was written was due to the delay in the development of the second generation games, Gold and Silver. Since those games got delayed, the writers needed something to fill the space in the anime while they waited for the new games to be released, and so they came up with the Orange Islands arc. Now, even though this arc is technically classified as filler, it's really not due to the excellent world building it adds to the show and for what it does to further develop Ash as a trainer. This season would give us our first look into regional form Pokemon and regional variants before they would be officially implemented into the games with the debut of Sun and Moon. This season also serves as the first true test for the writing staff since they don't have any games to serve as a blueprint with their storytelling in the anime. All the events and plots of the Orange Islands are completely anime exclusive, so it's all on the writing staff. This season truly allowed the writers to fix their mistakes that they made when writing the Indigo League saga and portray Ash as a much better and more competent trainer, and they really succeed big time in this aspect. They remedy the bond between Ash and Charizard, they start to really develop Ash's unpredictable battling style, they showcase how Ash can adapt to different situations under pressure, we see Ash using a mix of all his Pokemon and catch new ones like Lapras and Snorlax, and even accomplish his biggest achievement at the time and still one of his biggest of all time, winning the Orange League. He actually manages to win his first 6v6 battle against Drake and defeats his undefeated Dragonite with Pikachu. To this day, it is still one of the most iconic moments in the entire anime. The creativity the writers had while writing this season really shows, as they can truly take the time to develop characters further, since they basically have an entire extra season to work with and showcase the beauty and uniqueness of the Pokemon world. The Orange Islands arc was so successful it would even go on to inspire an entire in-game location in the Red and Blue remakes of Fire Red and Leaf Green 4 years later in Generation 3, being the Sevi Islands. The Orange Islands would even become a major comparison point to the Generation 7 games of Sun and Moon. Now, an aspect I want to focus on more with this season is Ash's battling skills during the Orange League. He really works a lot better with his Pokemon, and this is the season where he really begins to develop his adaptive nature and unpredictability. The gym leaders of the Orange crew aren't your typical gym leaders like in Kanto. They're much more akin to the trial captains of the Alola region. Having more unconventional battles and these unique challenges really tested Ash's ability to think critically and to solve problems that weren't just about battling, which is so well done because it really develops Ash not just as a battler, but as a thinker. Every battle against the Orange crew required him to use his Pokemon in different ways than in a normal battle. Because of this, I'd even argue it was a somewhat good choice for the writers to leave Brock with Professor Ivy, because now Ash doesn't have Brock to coach him during battle. Sure, he's still got Tracy and Misty to cheer him on and all, but Brock is clearly the more experienced trainer of the bunch, so his advice would be more valuable. But since Brock isn't there, a lot of Ash's quick thinking and creativity is all from him. Now, of course, the Orange Islands wasn't perfect, as Misty still doesn't have the best development, and Tracy went on to become a pretty forgettable character among the fanbase, and certain episodes are really hit or miss, but the writers definitely made major improvements with their writing. The pacing is still really good, and Ash is handled much better this time around. He takes what he learned in Kanto and applies all of it to his experiences in the Orange Islands. However, even though the writers did make major improvements to make the Orange Islands the gem that it is, their abilities would be tested even further when it comes to the following region when we arrive in Johto. So Ash Ketchum has won the Orange League and returned home to Pallet Town. What's next for his journey? Well, since Professor Oak is unable to figure out the mystery behind the GS ball, he asks Ash to deliver it to his friend Kurt in Azalea Town in the neighboring Johto region. He soon meets Professor Elm and decides that he's going to take part in the Johto League. This part of the original series is the first time we see the Pokemon anime dedicate 3 full seasons to its current region. Now, it's important to note that the quality of the writing is going to be heavily affected by 2 major aspects when it comes to Johto: the increase in the number of seasons and the addition of the new main series games. With the release of Gold and Silver, the anime can now go back to using the games as a blueprint to follow for its story. However, unlike with the Indigo League, which only lasted for 1 season, the writers now need to make this story occupy time for 3 seasons instead of 1. Ever since Johto, every following Pokemon series tends to have 3 seasons and approximately 50 episodes per season, with a few exceptions. So the Johto saga is going to challenge the writers on many different aspects, such as following the events of the games, their creativity, building the Pokemon world, showing off new Pokemon, maintaining the development Ash received in the Orange Islands, and especially the pacing. The Johto saga is overall pretty good, but it suffers from one major flaw: filler. The Johto saga has the most filler out of any other saga in the entire Pokemon anime, and this is what really holds back the series. Now, this isn't all on the writers, since there were some aspects that occurred that unfortunately led to so much filler. One noteworthy instance is the cancellation of the GS ball as a major plot device in the anime. The GS ball was meant to debut Celebi into the anime, which was the main reason Ash went to Johto in the first place, but when it gets delivered to Kurt, it's never mentioned again due to its scrapped usefulness in the anime. With the GS ball and its plot cut from the anime, the writers would need to create an entirely brand new idea to fill the space in its absence. Coming from the cut of the GS ball, the writers would then introduce the 13-episode long Whirl Islands arc into the anime to buy time for the release of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. There's all kinds of reasons for filler being created for an anime, and this one is very understandable. But as for the rest of Johto, a lot of filler for Johto is either hit or miss, and it can really drag down the quality of the series as a whole. However, as creative as the writers can be, they're still dealing with the first time they have to write 3 seasons worth of adventure for a single region, whereas in Kanto it was a single season of 80 episodes and the Orange Islands arc only lasted 36 episodes. Therefore, this makes the pacing entirely different, so the writers probably just largely suffered from a pacing issue with this part of the anime. But when it comes to major plot points and development, they do just as good as they did with Orange Islands. This is the first official region where Ash wins all his gym battles legitimately as well. He greatly uses a blend of old and new Pokemon throughout the Johto saga, he continues to develop his creative and unpredictable battling style, and even Misty and Brock get great development in the series as well. We get the introduction of Elite Four member Lance, we get to see what arcs featuring legendary Pokemon can be like, and the writers even do a better job at writing the Johto League. You also see Ash finally overcome Gary as a rival when he defeats him in the Johto League in a 6v6 match. Their rivalry is wrapped up quite nicely, and it serves as a culmination of all of Ash's skills and experience he's gained up until this point. This is also another aspect the Johto saga got right, as it really flushes out the rivalry between Ash and Gary. Back in the Indigo saga, Ash and Gary's rivalry was barely a plot point in the show at all. What we mostly saw and heard about was Gary teasing Ash and making fun of him for not being as good a trainer as he viewed himself. But the rivalry at that point was devoid of substance because they don't have any meaningful interactions that showcase who is actually better until the Johto saga when Ash's Pikachu battles against Gary's Eevee. But the upside is that they actually address this issue and give their rivalry more depth. Aside from their battling, we actually see the reason that Gary teases Ash, and it's not because he views himself necessarily as a better trainer, but because he wants to see Ash improve as well. And it's not until the end of the Johto saga that Ash realizes that, and this is also a tactic that Gary would later use on Go in Pokemon Journeys to help him develop as well. There's even a flashback that really dives into just how long Ash and Gary had considered themselves to be rivals, and it's this flashback that really cements their rivalry as a rivalry. We understand why both Ash and Gary act the way they do, and then we get to see how they behave towards each other after the Johto League, and the growth and development for both of them is just beautiful. Now that the Pokemon Company knows it's going to be continuing the franchise, that's also another aspect that will affect their writing as well. When they wrote the Indigo Saga, the franchise was never intended to extend past Generation 1, but then they began developing Gold and Silver. They got delayed, they created the Orange Islands arc, they released Gold and Silver, and the franchise saw popularity beyond its wildest dreams. So when we eventually arrive at the end of Johto, even though it feels like the end of an era when we see Ash, Misty, and Brock part ways, it really isn't, because we know Ash is going to travel through the Hoenn region after losing to Harrison and his Blaziken. This is of course where the original series comes to an end, but Ruby and Sapphire would be right around the corner with a whole new adventure like we haven't seen before. So we've covered the original series of the anime from Kanto to Johto, but now that we've done that, we've got to discuss something very important before we head into the other regions. Now that we've discussed the writing development of the original series, there's one major person we need to shed some light upon before we progress any further: Takeshi Shudo, Pokemon's original head writer for the anime. As the head writer of the anime, Takeshi Shudo would oversee the major writing decisions for the anime and its current story and narrative. Much of what makes the original series so unique and different from the rest of the series is due to the writing staff at the time and due to Takeshi Shudo being the head writer. However, Takeshi Shudo wouldn't remain the anime's head writer forever, and maybe it's for the best that he wasn't. Takeshi Shudo has spoken in interviews before about his thoughts and opinions on the status of the Pokemon anime at the time, which was only during the original series from Kanto to Johto. Now we need to remember that Pokemon as a whole was never intended to be as big as it has now become. Pokemania in the late 90s and early 2000s was unprecedented for the franchise, therefore the game developers never foresaw making the Generation 2 games, and even with those, they never intended to continue to Generation 3, which is why the games have so much cut content, because they wanted to put their all into what were originally going to be the final Pokemon games. Even the Pokemon anime was only meant to have one season. Could you imagine the anime only having one season and having it only be the Indigo League? Yeah, the Pokemon anime would definitely not have become iconic or massively popular. Now this is all still relevant because of how Takeshi Shudo perceived the Pokemon anime. Of course he viewed Ash Ketchum as the main protagonist, and the focus would be on him becoming a Pokemon master and traveling the Pokemon world. But he had an entirely different vision and outlook on the anime. In the interview I previously mentioned, Takeshi Shudo gives his thoughts on the Pokemon anime. In regards of the anime as a whole, he has said, "But despite everything, the anime and the merchandise all keep selling well. But just how long can you go on with the same formula? There's no place for the characters to grow. Children grow up quickly. I wanted to create a story that keeps up with their growth. But if Pokemon is doing well, I guess you could say there's no need to fix something that's not broken. The anime was never going to continue as long as it has, but when the decision was made to keep the anime alive and going, Takeshi Shudo still had different thoughts about how the anime should proceed. He would go on to make this statement before dying in 2010. After 3 or 4 years, a new Pokemon adventure with a new main hero should begin. With its own topics, this new Pokemon should adapt to its times. However, if Pokemon stays the same year after year, it's hard to imagine it touching on topics that are relevant with the times. With this in mind, it's more than likely that Ash's journey could have been completely over with after his adventure in the Johto region. However, it also explains why every Pokemon generation is only 3 years long, and 4 years in the cases of generations 3 and 4. Now, even though Ash continues to be the main protagonist of the series, a quote-unquote new Pokemon does start every 3 to 4 years, and every generation does have certain topics that it wants to address beginning in Generation 3, whether that's the environment in Ruby and Sapphire, or the meaning of truth and ideals in Black and White. Takeshi should have been able to sculpt the anime in the way he desired, maybe Pokemon would have been just a bit more mature of a show, or at least have the characters grow up as the show airs like how they develop in Naruto Shippuden. I also want to take a moment to touch upon the fact that the story of Ash Ketchum seemed pretty continuous from Kanto to Sinnoh. Sinnoh seemed like a perfect point for the anime to end, given how the final episode of Diamond and Pearl was written. Now, it may just be a coincidence, but having the Diamond and Pearl series end the way it did could have been made as an homage to honor the life of Takeshi Shudo, who had been the head writer for so long since he died the same year that Diamond and Pearl ended. The anime is still showcasing the same Ash Ketchum that we've known since the beginning, given all the continuity from Black and White, XY, Sun and Moon, and especially Pokemon Journeys. But Black and White can be seen as a fresh starting point for new fans since it was the first series to air after Takeshi Shudo's death. Generations 5 to 8 can also be seen as one continuous story of its own, as Ash's skills are pretty amateur in Black and White to now participating in the Champions League in Pokemon Journeys. All in all, the anime would have been much different had Takeshi Shudo gotten all his wishes in terms of the writing, and it could have been even more different if he was still writing it. But nonetheless, Takeshi Shudo still has an impact on the anime to this day, as the way the original series was written still holds ground for the way every series afterwards was written in some way or another. Rest in peace, Takeshi Shudo. Alright, now it's time for my final thoughts and opinions on the original series. Is it really as good as we remember through all nostalgia lenses? Kinda. Kanto is the beginning of the series and laid the groundwork for the entirety of the Pokemon anime. It's full of wacky adventures, hilarious adventures, and amazing fillers that display the beauty of the original series. The first 2 seasons have great pacing, and the series finishes off super strong with the Johto League and the goodbyes at the end. But everything in the middle can kinda be a drag at times. But the writers did a great job at sprinkling in beautiful moments and even epic moments in there at times to keep things lively and interesting. Kanto was experimental, definitely, but then Johto follows the more formulaic structure that future Pokemon series would come to adopt. We're introduced to beloved characters like Brock and Misty, Professor Oak and Delia Ketchum, Gary Oak, and of course our lovable 10-year-old protagonist Ash Ketchum, and even Team Rocket, no matter how annoying they can be. Without this original series, and especially without Kanto, there's no Pokemon anime at all, so we take the good with the bad, as this series showed off the Pokemon world in a way only the anime knows how. From Pikachu and all of Ash's amazing other Pokemon, seeing him go from a newbie to a pretty solid amateur by the end, seeing his journey in full in this series is super rewarding when you get to the final season. As nostalgic and beloved as it is, it's not perfect, but it deserves all the respect in the world for being where it started, setting the blueprints and groundwork for the rest of the series, and deserves respect for being the first series of Pokemon. So that's gonna wrap up our discussion of the writing of the original series of Pokemon, from Kanto to Johto. In the next part we'll be discussing the advanced generation, Ash's adventures through Hoenn and the Kanto Battle Frontier. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember to train hard, and I'll catch you guys later.